Well, Tim, depending on what you read on the internet, you got started in racing either at Bowman Gray Stadium or working with Tiny Lund. Which was it?
Well, it goes back way before that. I grew up in Southside Winston-Salem, and I was a kid. I was over on Chapel Street, and that's right across the street from Salem Spring, and they used to work on trucks and stuff. And as a kid, my brother and I, we'd go over there and get those big ball bearings off of those truck axles, and you'd whittle them down, drive them on a 2x4, go get you about a, 2x8, 2x6, whatever you could get, and you'd go over there and get you a ball bearing car, and we'd ride down the hill at Gray High School. That's now the North Carolina deal over there, and that's how we got started, just racing and piddling around. Unfortunately, one of the guys that worked at Salem Spring, he was up at the fairgrounds in Winston-Salem, and they had an old stock car race up there, and it wasn't a NASCAR sanctioned race, but there was a car that came through the wooden guardrail, and it killed a guy. And, he used to have old sawbunk over there, and he used to have a saddle on it. And I get out of school, I go over and sit in that saddle and ride that thing. But that's how we got started. And then I'm talking 61, 62.
Okay, all right.
So my brother and I, we moved from Sprague Street over to 1975 Bloomfield Drive, and that's right behind the Red Shield Boys Club on Stadium Drive. So we had these bicycles, and naturally you had clothespins, you had baseball cards, and you put them in the spokes, and you'd go riding down. And
how many Mickey Mantles did you tear
ain't
up?
no telling. I didn't know Mickey Mantle from a load of coal back then. But my brother and I, we went down Stadium Drive, and hey, what's that noise over there? I don't know. Well, let's go find out. Well, they had them race cars running over there, and they had them big old modified cars over there, old 36, 37 Chevrolet coupes and coaches and stuff. And there was guys over there named Carl Burrs. And, it's like the Myers brothers. And, it was tons of people over there. But the big race over there was Easter Monday race. And that's when they'd bring in huge Grand National cars in there. And, they were like boats. But, old guys come in there and, they'd drive their pickup trucks or ton trucks in there, and they'd have a trailer, and they wouldn't even have no fenders on the trailers. And old Pearson got on me one time. He said, "Brewer, I remember you." "How do you remember me, Pearson?" He said, "You that kid that used to jump on the tires on my trailer." And back then they had weather stripping on the steering wheels.
Yeah.
And I'd be sitting there sawing on that steering wheel, and Pearson go, "Hey, kid, get out of here. Go on away from here." "Okay, no problem." But watching those guys run over there, and then years ago, years. I was probably a teenager working, on one of the cars, and we're sitting around for the pre-race, sign in and stuff. And Pearson goes, "What's your name?" I said, "Tim Brewer." He goes, "I know you from somewhere." I said, "Yeah, you run me off your trailer a couple times." He said, "You that kid at Bowman Gray Stadium." But Pearson, he became a great friend, and one of the best. He couldn't stay mad at nobody. He might get mad at you for a little bit, but he'd get over it real quick. But no, that's where it all started, Rick, in Bowman Gray Stadium in Winston-Salem. And it's one of those deals we watched a lot of guys come up over there. Buren Skeen, he was a big star over there. Well, he got to Darlington, he got killed. It's like Chocolate Myers. When I was growing up, Chocolate was like my bodyguard. And his brother Poncho, they were like 4 or 5 years older than me, but I hung out with them guys all the time. But every service station in Winston-Salem had a race car. I'm talking about James Call and all those guys. Well, their father, they built race cars, but it's like everybody had a shop behind her house in Southside. They had a race car. It didn't matter if it was a hobby car, a modified car, or whatever. Or Ernie Faust, he lived right down the street from us, and we used to go over there, and it'd be 3 or 4 cars out in the parking lot, and everybody'd be working on their race cars. But I mean, that's how I grew up. I was a kid working on race cars, piddling around. Richard Childress, met him, worked with Ernie Shaw for quite some time. And Ernie taught me a lot about racing. Ernie taught me a lot about, maintenance in a race car, and heaven forbid, don't let nothing fall off of it. You don't leave nothing loose. You don't stop right in the middle of doing anything. You make sure it's finished before you go do whatever. And I see these guys now, they got headsets on, and they got wires and this, that, and the other, and they're talking on the phones. And I had one incident at the racetrack where a guy was talking on the phone, and he was moving a piece of tungsten. And I said, hey, Hoss, let me tell you something. You either take that damn telephone off and get your man in the game, or go on over and talk to your wife, your girlfriend, whoever you're doing, because you ain't wearing that thing working on my race car, period. You stayed focused, period. Yeah. But it started at Bowman Gray. We wound up at 311 Speedway running some dirt stuff, and I hate red mud. I hate it. And, it's like anything else. We progressed along, but the Grand American Series, working with Ernie, he had a number 17 Mustang, and we painted it up like Pearson's car. Occasionally we painted it red, white, and blue for the Paul Revere race at Daytona and stuff like that. But we were in Daytona, and I guess about 1968. I was a blistering 13 years old and working on that car. And, well, Ernie, he got to hustle a little bit too hard, and on the road course. And next thing you know, caution's out, and here comes number 17 on the back of a wrecker. And I mean, it knocked the front end, the front bumper off of it, the grill, the hood, the right front fender, the right door, quarter panel. I mean, it tore it all to pieces. And I'll never forget, Ernie went over there to see Bill France Sr., and he gave him a check and said, go down to Ford Place and get whatever you need to fix your race car. And I didn't know it at the time, but Buck Baker was sitting over there on the workbench. And I'm over there going, okay, so we stripped the car down and, putting the thing back together. And the only thing I had was a acetylene torch.
Yeah.
So we didn't have wire welders or anything. So, you just sat there and welded the fenders back on and went on about your business. Anyway, we got it all back down on the ground, got it all put back together. And Mr. Buck, what I called him, Buck Baker, he come over and said, kid, he said, you keep working on them race cars like that, he said, you're going to be making $500 a week and winning races before long. I said, Mr. Buck, I hope you're right, brother, because I ain't getting paid nothing right now. But you got an opportunity working with Ernie. We went to Columbia, South Carolina, to Savannah, Georgia, and wound up down in Mississippi, and then Alabama, and then we wound up going back through Nashville, Tennessee. Now, this was like 68, maybe 69. That's when that racetrack was banked like 36 degrees or something. Yeah. And those guys run those sportsman cars up there, and I'm telling you, they were carrying the mail back then. They run like 127, 128 mile an hour around that place, and it's like Bristol on steroids. But we'd leave Nashville and go up to Jackson, Michigan, and we ran Mr. Penske's racetrack up there. And then we'd go run the Northern Tour, and you'd go all up through Maine and New York. And I mean,
now who were you working with at that?
Ernie Shaw.
Okay, all right.
And the Grand American division. Yeah. And it was just like a traveling circus. Ken Rush and all those guys, Tiny Lund, Stan Starr, and a bunch out of Nashville, Tennessee. There's tons of Camaros, Mustangs, and Jim Pascal, he had the Javelin, and Warren Prout and all those guys, they had their American Motor sponsorship, and I mean, that's like a factory-back team. And I used to go hang out with old Joe Holliday and Prout and all them guys, and just learn a little something. But back in the Grand American Series, it was a fun series, and everybody thinks that the first race at Talladega, it's Talladega 500. No, it wasn't either. It was the Bama 400.
Yeah.
We ran it in 1969 on a Saturday afternoon. And you know, first time I pulled in a racetrack, Rick, I looked up and seen one of them wing Dodges coming about 200 mile an hour. I went, what in the hell was that? But I mean, that was 1969. But I mean, at the end of the day, we ran the race, and I'll never forget Mr. France Sr. came down there to the garage area. And he got all the drivers together, and, you know, I'm just a kid. I'm just standing there. And he said, those guys up there, and he called them prima donnas back then, they're not going to run my race tomorrow. And he said, I got to have some people to come in to fill in because I need to run this race or I'm going to be in financial trouble big time. Ernie said, hey, Tim, get the truck. I used to drive the truck. I mean, that wasn't no big deal. 13, 14 years old, I could drive a truck, work on the car, drive through New York City.
Yeah.
Used to drive a C550 Ford cab over, had a hydraulic clutch on it, and it leaked the fluid out of it. You got to pump that thing all the way to New York City, and some guy pulls up beside of you, and he's in the back seat of a limo sitting there reading his newspaper, having his coffee. And I'm going, oh, okay, New York City, whoopee. But when Mr. France came down there, you know, Ernie said, hey, Tim, take the car and the truck down there. Yes, sir. Jumped in the truck, carried the thing down there, and Rick, it was big. I mean, you know, that was going to be some big money for those guys. Richard Childress, he was there. But, I mean, at the end of the day, France came down there, and I'm unloading the ramps and putting them down, and I'm down there working, and I see this kind of shadow come up, and it's Bill France Sr., and he's down there thanking everybody, and he come over by me. He said, son, what's your name? I said, Tim Brewer. He said, I'll never forget what you're doing for me today. Okay, yes, sir.
Wow.
And that was big. But years later, we were in Sonoma, California, running a road course. And that's when they came out and said that Mr. France had passed away. And Ralph Seagraves, T. Wayne Robertson Jr., and me, after we run the race, we came back home, we got in our 100 King Air, and we were the first ones to come through the funeral deal down there for France Sr. And lo and behold, years later, I went to Bill Jr.'s funeral down there too.
Yeah.
And that's a great story, but that's way on down the road.
Yeah.
But Rick, it's been an adventure. A kid that come out of Winston-Salem that quit school
To go race.
young age to go racing,
Really?
and worked in Ernie Shaw's machine shop right there in Southside Winston-Salem. Knew all the cops. My uncle was the chief of police, Buck Marshall. My uncle Ed Marshall. He wound up being my PR guy at Budweiser years later, but he was a sheriff there. But MC Benton, the mayor of Winston-Salem, he right there in Southside at the Fat Man's Lounge, breakfast, lunch, whatever. Malcolm McLean owned McLean Trucking Company. He would come in, Tim, yes sir. You change oil in my car? Yes sir. You change spark plugs? Sure. Do all that stuff. But I worked on all those guys' cars. Gene Pratt, he was a very, very respected guy in Winston-Salem. Ebner Alexander, he was a judge. And, you became friends with a lot of those guys, and, you was just a kid that worked at the shop. But, later on down the road, years later, I had a couple of run-ins with some things I probably shouldn't have been doing. And, they took good care of me. But, Rick, that was just Winston-Salem, North Carolina. You went to Bowman Gray Stadium. You run the race, and you went home and you worked on your car at night, in the evenings, and stuff like that. But that's just what we did. It's growing up in an environment to where you worked. You didn't sit there and play with a computer all day. You didn't sit there and watch cartoons. When I was a kid, I used to watch cartoons on Saturday morning and watch combat on TV and all that stuff. And we'd go play Army in the woods, and I went, man, getting shot at can't be much fun. The only thing I go work on a race car. Maybe that'll be a little bit better. But Rick, it's evolved so much. It's one of those deals. Richard Childress, he gave me my first big opportunity after he seen that I went to work for Tiny Lund, and I left Winston-Salem, and I was living with Ernie and Doris Shaw back then, and I was 16 years old. I had a 64 Chevrolet, and I drove it to Cross, South Carolina, and got there about 2 o'clock in the morning. And you talk about lost as an Easter egg. Trying to get through South Carolina. There wasn't no interstate highways.
Yeah, yeah.
And, you know, I got to cross South Carolina and I went, there ain't nothing here. I mean, there was a post office there, a service station, and you turned behind that and went on down there, and that's where Tiny Lund's fish camp was at.
Yeah.
And I went in there and knocked on the door, and he come to the door. He said, Brewer, go over and get one of them cabins. I'll wake you up in the morning. Mom will wake you up and fix breakfast. We're going to go to work. Okay. We went to work, Rick, and we worked from 7:30 that morning after eating breakfast. The shop was up the road, and I think we got through about 9 o'clock at night. And so it's like, hey, the shower's over there. You can go jump in the lake. Either one you want to do. Okay. He said, I'm going to go for a swim. Okay, big man. And Tiny was a big man.
Yeah.
But, you know, we hung out there, and, you know, you jump off the pier, and, you know, there's 3 or 4 dogs in there with you. And, I mean, you know, it was a fish camp, and Tiny loved fishing. And he told me a few stories about his fishing stuff, and it was interesting. But we stayed there and worked for Tiny for, I don't know, probably 6-7 months. And then Richard Childress, you know, we were at Rockingham, and Tiny, we had a number 55 Chevrolet. And it was a 72 Chevelle, I guess it was. And Tiny said, hey, we're going to go out and run some state fair races. Where's that at? Oh, we're going to go out in the Midwest. And that's when I met Butch Hartman and Jack Bowser and all those gunslingers out there. And you talk about some tough hombres now. Them was some tough guys because, hey, they had them big Hemis and them Dodges. They had them big 429 Fords, and we're out there with a big block Chevrolet. But Lund, I'm telling you, I've seen a lot of people on dirt. They ain't nobody like Tiny Lund because that man was a showman. He'd turn that thing sideways at the start-finish line and back it down in the corner. And by the time you think he's going to back into that fence, he'd hit the gas and go the other way. But he was a wheel man, and Tiny, we went out there and we were sponsored by Bowman high-speed bulk transfer, and I still got a picture of Tiny sitting beside it. We had a Chevrolet, and we had an old Ford at Charlotte. We went over to Charlotte Motor Speedway and carried that thing over there, and I got a picture of Tiny propped up against that old Ford, and he was a wheel man, but he got up with Ronnie Hopkins after leaving Tiger Tom Pistone and the Cougar, and he had the Pepsi-Cola Mercury Cougar, and Tiger, he won a lot of races. Tiger, he was funny, and it's funny. His son, Tommy Jr., we're at South Boston, and he taught me how to check the wedge in a car. And Tommy was about a year older than me, and we become good friends. And you know, working around Tiger, working around Tiny, Ernie, you learned a lot. You traveled a lot. You know, and I'm not talking about staying at the Hilton every weekend. I'm talking about, you know, hey, you slept in a truck and done whatever you had to do. But Rick, it's evolved into something. You know, those young guys come in years later and go, oh, I can't get on the airplane this week. Dude, you got a $40,000 van. You got a credit card. All you got to do is stop and eat and put fuel in it and do whatever you want to. And, oh, you can't get on the, oh, excuse me, you ain't earned the right to get on the airplane yet. But going back and finally finishing the deal with Tiny, and then Childress, you know, he said, hey, Brewer, I need a guy to change a front tire for me at Martinsville. Ain't no problem, RC. I'll come up Sunday morning, change the tire, and, you know, we'll get going. Well, we done pretty good. And this guy named Tom Garn, LC Newton Trucking Company, out of Seaford, Delaware. He said, I got this guy that's going to sponsor this car. Okay, but he said, Brewer, he's just going to sponsor it on the speedways. He's not going to help me out on the short track stuff. I said, okay, that's fine. You know, we'll see what we can do. And that was about 1973, and that's when I went to work for Richard Childress. And, you know, I'd go to Seaford, Delaware, and work on a speedway car, and we'd take it to the racetrack and stuff, and then go back to, you know, Childress' shop and work on a short track car. And anyway, it evolved into something that I stayed there for 5 years with Richard Childress. And, it's like they count my wins and count my poles and this, that, and the other. Well, we were in Daytona, and Ned Jarrett came by. He said, hey, I rented a speedway over there in Metrolina. He said, we're going to have an invitational race. Suits me. Well, we didn't do too good at Daytona, so when we got home, Childress said, hey, you want to get that short track car ready? Sure, no problem. He said, I think they open the gates at 8 o'clock. I said, I'll be here in the morning, load the thing up and we're going down there. We went down there, Rick, and Cale Yarborough's driving somebody's car, and Walter Ballard's there, and, several of the other guys, Ty Scott and a bunch of young guys. And I'm thinking, oh, okay. Looks like Richmond to me. Okay. So we slung some springs in it and this, that, and the other. We sat on the pole. And
with Richard.
Yeah, with Richard Childress. Didn't get credit for that one. Anyway, as a NASCAR race, sat on the pole. Okay, no big deal. We qualified, and here come Dick Beatty. He said, what are you doing? I said, I'm jacking the car up. Beatty, I got to change a gear in this car. He said, no, you can't do that. What are you talking about, Beatty? No, whatever gear you qualified with, that's what you got to race. I said, well, I got news for you. You need to get the promoter, tell Ned he needs to move the grandstands back about 30 feet. He said, why is that? I said, I just put a 583 gear in a big block Chevrolet and turned it almost 8,000 RPMs for Childress to qualify. And when this thing blows up, it's going to kill half the people in the first 5 rows of the grandstands. He said, Brewer, and here's Childress. He goes, he's just nervous.
Yeah.
Well, what are you going to do? I said, don't worry, RC, I'll fix it. Don't worry about it. It'll be all right. He goes, what are you going to do? I said, don't worry, I'll fix it. Okay, Tim. All right, not a problem. So I got a picture of me and Johnny Mize and Richard on the start-finish line getting ready to start. And I got my hat turned around backwards. And this is like 73, 4, something like that. I laughed at that picture. And Childress, I go in the foyer over there, and he's got it on the wall over there. And I'm going, oh, okay. But anyway, we won the race. And Thurman Huggins and them guys with Goodyear, they was elated. But it was one of those things. That's the first time I'd been to Victory Lane, period. And I'm telling you, that guy named Cale Yarborough was like chomping at him big time, and him and Walter Ballard, a bunch of them spun out with a few laps to go, and just so happened we got out, so we won the race. But Rick, they wasn't throwing empty beer cans at us. They was throwing full ones at us.
This was serious.
I said, man, I guess they wanted Cale to win. I don't guess they like you, Childress. but that kind of got us going. And after that, it just, Childress, he was good for the sport. He and I, we worked hard on them race cars. And Banjo Matthews, he was very instrumental in, putting the front clip on Childress's car and teaching me how to work on it and understand it. And Banjo Matthews was one of the smartest guys that came down the pike, because he had a punch button adding machine on his desk, and he could tell you if you changed a piece of roll bar tubing from 90 thousandths to 50 thousandths, he could tell you exactly how much weight he's going to be saving.
Wow.
And Banjo'd always get on me. He said, okay, kid, come here. Yeah. How you stabilize that car? Banjo, you put more caster in it. More positive caster stabilizes the car. All right, what'd you do to the steering arm? Well, it dropped the steering arm down on a rear steer car, and you got to go back and you got to correct the bump. I just wondered if you knew that, Brewer. Yeah, Banjo, I knew that.
Now, how did you wind up as crew chief, quote unquote?
It was easy. When it come time to dismount the tires, when it come time to build the gears, or put the transmission in, or put the motor in, or paint the car, do the body work, I was the only one standing there. So it was simple.
Yeah, tag, you're it.
Yeah, it's like, who's going to clean the lug nuts? Oh, Tim will get them. Who's going to dismount all the tires? Oh, Tim will get it. Who's going to clean the race car? Tim will get it. Who's going to put them ring gear and pinions? We had 3 ratchets back then for the differentials.
Yeah.
And you didn't have the luxury of, just go get the gear off the rack. Oh no, you had to take the ring gear and pinion out, and you had to build a gear. every week. It's like 3 gears maybe. But Richard Childress, back in the day, we had L.C. Newton Trucking Company sponsoring the car. It was white and it was a beautiful blue, and number 96. But I'm the luckiest guy on the planet, because back years ago we had Imron paint, and what that was, Rick, it was 3 quarts of paint and 1 gallon of activator. And you could hit it with a hammer, you couldn't break it. And I painted the inside of them cars, and I didn't know what a respirator was.
Oh, hello.
and I mean, I'm a lucky guy.
Yeah.
I used to come to work for Richard Childress, and we were right there on Old Lexington Road, right behind the Wilco station in Southside for years. And I was fortunate because we could back the truck and the trailer in there, so I didn't have to freeze to death until it was time to pull the truck and the trailer out. And then I had to, put the car on it, and then I could pack everything back in. But that went pretty good for a while. And then he said, hey, we're going to move up here across the street from the bank. So we was at 659 Walltown Street, right there in Winston-Salem. And they used to call it Southside Precinct, because Gary Lloyd and Bob Walsworth and all the guys that worked for the police department, there was an old bank right across the street. Well, they kind of had to keep an eye on it at night, so they'd come over there and sit on the hood of the police car and watch me and Childress work on the race cars. So it was a Southside Precinct, and that was a big joke, but everybody in town knew us.
Yeah.
And, we could crank them things up, and, had a church across the street and a bank across the street, but, we were pretty good in Southside as far as taking care of the people and stuff. But, one thing led to another, and then, it was funny back then because we had limited resources. Yeah. You couldn't go buy, and we didn't have the money to buy it anyway. You had to make it. And, you'd go down to Roy Setzer's Hardware down there in Southside, and you'd buy, hardware cloth to put across the screen. You'd buy pop rivets. You'd buy just enough to do whatever you had to do. It wasn't like, at Juniors, hey, give me 500 of them pop rivets, 500 of them, 500 of that, whatever. That was a luxury. But when we worked for Childress, I worked there, I don't know, almost 5 years. And RC and I, we got along just as good as anything in the world. And his wife, Judy Kay, she'd come in there every Monday morning. And it's like, okay, Brewer, where's your receipts at? And I'd start pulling receipts out of my pockets and in an envelope and this, that, and the other. Here, this is for gas, this is for Roy Setzer's Hardware, and this, that, and the other. I worked for the man and woman for 5 years. We never had a discrepancy over 1 penny.
No kidding.
It's just like, hey, what's this for? Well, it's, whatever.
Yeah.
I'll never forget we had a guy building some motors for us up in Akron, Ohio, and that's with a speedway car. And I'd leave Delaware, and I'd go to Ohio to get the motors and, put fuel in. But at that time, I had one credit card, and I stopped at this one gas station, and they didn't take credit cards, so I paid them in cash. And it was Redhead Gas and Fuel or whatever. And I got back and I turned the receipts in, and I'll never forget, Tom Garn come out of the office. He said, Brewer, what the hell's this? $22 for a Redhead. I said, Tom, it was a gas station. They wouldn't bring a credit card, man. And he just laughed. He said, I had to come out and bust you on that one. I said, hey, whatever. Ain't no big deal. But, it's one of those things. We run the race down in Talladega when they started 60 cars one year and had big wrecks and stuff like that. And we were fortunate. We blew up, and I put the car on the trailer. Well, I'm riding back up the road, and that's the speedway car. And Nick Garn, Tom's younger brother, he was driving, and some guy come by us in a big 18-wheeler with a stainless steel trailer behind it, and he must have been running 90 mile an hour. When he passed us, Nick got by.
Well, I know who that was.
It wasn't Henry Benfield.
That was Henry Benfield.
No. But anyway, he got to wheeling and dealing, and the next thing I know, I'm in the van laying in the bunk asleep. And I wake up, and they're hollering, and this thing is squealing tires, this, that, and that. Well, it turned it over, and we were in Anderson, South Carolina. Turned the speedway car over, and Tom said, well, I don't know if we'll make the next race or not. He said, I got to take that thing back to Delaware, and I don't think the body man's got time to fix it. I said, well, leave it at Childress' shop. I'll fix it. And Childress come out there. He said, man, you know what you got us into? I think I stayed up like 7, 8 days,
Yeah.
working and trying to get that car back together. So
Now, were you hurt?
Oh, no. A nitrogen bottle went by my head, but, when the thing turned over, wasn't nothing tied down in the back of that van. But I remember sliding on the roof, and you got a little bit hot, so you put your elbows down. Well, they got a little bit burnt, but other than that, it tore that race car all to pieces. But the van,
Now, whose car was it?
It was Richard Childress.
Okay, it was Richard's.
Number 96. But we were down, like I said, we were in Talladega that year that they started 60 cars.
Uh-huh.
And, man, it tore up everybody's stuff down there when everybody wrecked. But we blew up, so it didn't tear our car up in the race.
Yeah.
But we tore it up on the way home.
Now, what was the reaction in the garage to you being the crew chief at such a young age?
I used to think Jake Elder was the meanest man in the world. And Herb Nabb, you got to keep an eye on Herb.
Yeah.
But I sat down in poker games and played with Earl Parker, G.C. Spencer, Herb Nabb, Jake Elder. I mean, G.C., whoo, you want to get a card game going. And, we'd be playing cards and this, that, and the other. Well, the next thing, here come Pearson with a couple of honeys, and it's like, Grover, he'd break on them big time. But Barney Hall, I love Barney Hall. I mean, he was the all-time best. Rick, if I wasn't at the racetrack, Barney Hall could say, well, they're going off in turn 1 at Dover, Delaware, down to the bottom of the racetrack, up off 2. I could see it in my mind.
You could see it, yeah.
I mean,
absolutely.
he was an artist. Him, Ken Squire. I met Ken Squire at Catamount Speedway in 1968. And Squire and I go back a long time. And Rick, Ken Squire is, he's aces. I mean, he came through when I had my tech garage, and that's way down the road. And I seen him walking through the garage area, and I went, hey, Brewer, how you doing? Holy Jesus, that's yours, Brewer? Yeah, come on in. And I had a nice 42-foot motor coach, and I parked it right beside of my tech garage. And Squire said, man, they won't even give me a pass to get in here. I got to walk. I said, man, that's 300 yards. That's a long way for an old guy. I said, you ain't that old, Squire. He goes, Brewer, how long have I known you? I went, I think I met you in 1968. 1968? I've known you that long? I went, yeah. But those people, Barney Hall and those guys, they're fabulous. But to answer your question, when I sat down in a poker game with Jake Elder, Jake, he was a little slow on reading and writing. And Herb, he was, he'd just kind of like flash them cards like that right there. And it's like, Herb, put the cards on the table. What are you talking about, kid? I said, dude, I've been in a few card games. I might be young, but I've been in a few card games. Because we used to run a game over at the shop and, house cut and this, that, and the other.
Yeah.
Hey, we'd do anything at Southside, It's like Childress, he said, you got to go next door and get us some soft drinks. I said, well, how about we get the guy down at the Pepsi-Cola place to put a drink machine in here? I ain't being responsible for that. I said, here, I'll put it in here. Okay, Brewer. So I got the profit off the machine. So, I'm making a little bit of money.
Yeah.
I mean, Rick, I don't care what you got to do, but you got to make a little bit of money. It's like when we wasn't working for Childress on his race cars, we was buying cars, and you'd take 2 of them Dodge Challengers that'd been one crashed in the front, one in the rear. Well, you'd cut them in 2 and weld them together with a coat hanger and a acetylene torch.
Yeah.
You had to make a living. You had to eat.
Yeah.
So we were pretty good. And RC, he was pretty good at the gift of gab, and knowing John Morrow and the people at Piedmont Airlines and everybody else in town. We could make do.
Yeah.
But it's one of those deals. After we were in Darlington and K.O. Yarborough, they used to have a big steel pole at the end of pit road and filled with concrete. We were down there and learned a lot at Darlington from a lot of people, but I guess it was one of those deals. Cale was trying to beat somebody out of the pits, and he hooked that right rear wheel on that pole. And we're sitting in the garage area with RC's car. We blew the motor up. And this, Southern 500, well, I see Cale come in there, and I still got the car there. I got everything else loaded, but, we got the toolbox and got the jack stands there and stuff. And Junior come flying around the corner. He says, Tim, I need the rear end housing out from under that car. Okay, you get that one out. I get this one out. And I'm sitting there. He's got Herb Knapp and Bobby Jones and Turkey Mint and all them guys over there, and they working and thrashing this, that, and the other. And Junior looks up and he goes, how the hell did you get that thing out of there quick? I said, you said you wanted it. So, I got the rear end housing.
I didn't think he was kidding.
Oh, yeah. Okay, not a problem. Pull the rear end housing out from under it. Anyway, blend the rear brakes, put dry shaft in it. They put grease in it. Okay, here we go. Anyway, he goes, you pretty quick, ain't you? I said, well, they don't wait on you all day. You got to do what you got to do. Anyway, Junior turned around and said, hey, by the way, what happened to Childress' car? I said, motor blew up. He said, what gear you got in that thing anyway? I said, 400. He said, a 400? I said, yeah, that's Darlington, dude.
Yeah.
The tire's going to slow down 2-3 seconds. I told Childress, I said, hey, don't run it in turn one. Backstretch, you can run as hard as you want to. But I said, you better soft pedal it down that front straightaway. A 400? I said, what gear did you have in yours? He said, a 370. I said, we're going to find out how good your motor is, too. But lo and behold, on down the road, Childress knew I wanted to win. He knew it, and he gave me a good break, because later on that year, Herb Knapp, the rumor was that he was going to leave and go to work for Harry Rainier, and this was 1977, and I didn't think much about it, and I said, well, whatever. But Junior called Richard and said, hey, Herb's going to be leaving. He said, could I talk to Tim? He said, what do you want to talk to Tim about? He said, well, I got to get me a crew chief. And Richard said, really? He said, yeah, talk to him, see what he says, And at the same time, Herb Knapp was trying to talk me into coming over there to Rainier's and working for him. But, Herb was one of them kind of guys, I'm going to pay you this, but you got to pay me a couple of $100 kickback.
No kidding. Wow. Okay.
Herb, I don't do business like that.
Yeah.
I said, what you pay me is what you pay me. But, it's like when I went to work for Junior. He said, well, or I'm going to pay you this, then, we'll do some deal. And I said, no, wait a minute, time out. I said, I ain't no thief. You might deal with some in your life, but you ain't dealing with me. I said, you're going to pay me this much, and you ain't got to worry about your gears, your transmissions, and all your stuff disappearing, because that ain't going to happen with me, period. And let me tell you, we were sitting there in Junior's office talking, and Travis Carter came up. And Travis asked Junior, he said, I come up and talk to you about that crew chief job. I said, well, I just hired Tim Brewer. And I asked Junior, I said, hey, wait a minute, time out. He said, what do you think, Brewer? I said, dude, I ain't never won championship before. I said, you're trying to win 76, you've won, 77, you won, now you're trying to win 78. And I told Junior, I said, come here a minute. He said, you got anything in the budget maybe we could bring Travis in too? He looked at me and said, why would you want to do that, Tim? I said, because he's won championship. I hadn't. I said, you want to win 3, right? He said, yeah, I want to win 3. I said, you got any money in the budget for Travis?
So that was your idea.
Yeah. And he told Travis, he said, Brewer was invited to come here. He said, you wasn't. But he said, Tim wants to do it with you, Travis.
Wow.
He said, would you be up for that? He said, yeah, he said, I'll do that. And him and Junior sat down and cut their own deal, and I didn't ask no questions about it.
Yeah.
But I seen Junior Johnson, and there's a lot of tradition there, but I wasn't going to be the one to let him down.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's when Travis Carter and we worked together the end of 77, 78, 79, 80. Travis Carter and I never had a crossword, not one time.
Wow. Okay.
Not one time. And
Yeah.
Travis, he was a smart guy, and I learned a lot from Travis. Travis learned a few tricks from me, and yeah, we're still good friends today.
Yeah.
And but yeah, it says crew chief, but Travis Carter and I were co-crew chiefs.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you know that a lot of people said, "Well, Brewer, why'd you say that?" Because it's the damn truth. That's why. And you know, we won that championship with Cale Yarborough. I contributed. Travis contributed. Junior contributed. A lot of people don't understand. The big guy in the picture was Harold Elliott. He won the championships with Cale in 76, 77. We won them in 78. Should have won 79.
Now you're talking about building the engines.
Building engines.
Okay.
And this guy was an engine builder. He what you at Junior Johnson's, you didn't call Corella and buy you 8 connecting rods, and you didn't call Diamond and buy you 8 pistons. You made them. I sat at a bandsaw many an hour because Harold knew that I worked in the engine room in Jacksonville, Florida for Speedy Spears when he was building Tiny Lund's engines. And he went, Brewer, you kind of know your way around the motor room a little bit, don't you? I said, well, I've been lost in one a time or two, but you know, I found my way out.
Yeah.
And he'd say, hey, Brewer, I need you to help me, you know, had them old K-rods, big journals, big crankshaft journals and all that stuff. And we thought you had to have that stuff for durability. Because Junior's moral back then was, don't let nothing fall off my race car. And Cale, he can tear up anything, so you better make it bulletproof. And, you know, Cale, he'd run it till, you know, there wasn't no end. But you learn a lot. And Junior, you know, he's one of those kind of guys, he goes, I own a surface plate up at Banjo's. Yeah? What's that mean? He said, well, we're going to go up there and build race cars. You're not building no race cars. Banjo builds race cars. You know, but he said, come on, we're going to go up there. And me and him and Travis, we'd get in a truck and we'd go up there and stay 2 or 3 days, you know, and you learned a lot. But Junior was one of them kind of guys. He could get anything out of Detroit, Michigan, you know, because we were Rhonda Engineering. Didn't nobody in that damn place have an engineering degree, but that's what they called it. But we got more stuff out of General Motors coming to Rhonda Engineering, and them bean counters up there, they probably had no clue what Rhonda Engineering was.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
I mean, that's just the way it was. And Butch Elkin at Diamond Racing, you know, he used to do cylinder heads for us and stuff, but the valves and cylinder heads and springs and the stuff we did up there with inertia dynos, and I had a friend down at NC State University. He was Professor Joe David. He taught Doug Yates how to build engines. He went to school there. About everybody who worked for Doug Yates today went through NC State. My son went to NC State, but he got real disarrayed when Professor Joe David, he passed away laying at Duke University waiting on a heart transplant, and he didn't make it. So my son got disarrayed, so he didn't finish the last year. Even though I tried to get him to go back to school, he wouldn't do that. And Scott, you know, I wish he would have done that, because he would be an engineer full blown. But you know, he's a car chief, and you got to be an engineer this day and time. But anyway, that's another 20 some years down the road.
Yeah.
But Rick, I can tell you a million different stories about different people. But Harold Elliott, you know, to get back to my train of thought, 76, 77, 78, and you know, he won the championship with Rusty Wallace. And I mean, you know, the guy he was really good, and he had a problem with his heart, and they replaced the valve, and that didn't work real well. He had some health issues, and he had a coating business, and the next thing you know, they replaced the next valve in his heart, and he finally passed away.
Yeah.
But Harold Elliott, he belongs in that Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
He belongs there, which I know a lot of people that do. But I mean, that's just like the people I'm up against. There's 10 different guys, and I know each and every one of them. Raced against them for years. Got the most respect for them.
Yeah.
But I mean, hey, we'll see how it goes.
Yeah.
To me, it's just an honor just to be nominated to get anything. But you go back to the racing aspect. Junior, he's a unique eye for talent. But at the end of the Cale Yarborough era at juniors, you know, and Cale told me, he said, you know, I was getting ready to leave the house the other day, and, you know, my two girls are sitting there on the steps, and what happened? He said, Daddy, where you going? I said, I got to go to the racetrack. Said, you said you was going to fix my bicycle tire. When did I tell you that? About a month ago, and Cale told me, he said, you know, I done about all I can do. I said, you ain't done yet by no means. Come on, man, let's get on with it. He said, no. He said, I think I'm going to get out of this thing, Brewer. He said, at least I'm going to start racing part-time. He said, I got a guy to offer me a lot of money to do this stuff. And, you know, me and Junior, we kind of knew what was going on, but it was one of them deals, who we going to get? Got to look at Darrell. All right, hire him. Okay, see how that works for you. And come find out the conversation was already going.
Yeah.
So, Paul Holbrook, he was my friend. He was my buddy. And he was Yadkin Valley Bank up in North Wilkesboro. And Junior, you know, he would always get on me about buying stuff and doing crazy stuff. And he'd go, don't matter to me, whatever you want to buy, go ahead. He said, ain't got one little problem, Brewer. I said, what's that, Junior? He said, I don't care what you buy. Buy whatever you want to. Buy equipment, do whatever you want to. Just figure out how you're going to pay for it. So we'd sell race cars and we'd do whatever we got to do. But when Darrell came to work, you know, it was like.
Now, that was your idea, or you were in favor of the idea at least.
Oh, yeah, with Darrell.
Yeah.
Yeah, because Darrell was good. I mean, he was a shoe now. Hey, we beat him, but we didn't beat him by much a few times. But Darrell, he had a few of his old tricks and buckshot and dropping lead out of frame rails and stuff. I made a Christian out of him real quick. Anyway, but that was in 1981.
How hard was it to see Cale leave? Or did you understand the fact that he wanted to?
I get it.
Yeah.
You know, I get it. You know, it's like my son today. My granddaughter's 8 years old. Scott was with Childress for 10 years with Harvick, and he was with Clint Boyer. And, you know, then they talked him into coming to Roush's, and now he's over at, you know, car chiefing for that 7 car, which is a struggle. And sometimes my son will call me and goes, Dad, I've been meaning to call. I said, Scott, buddy, I get it.
Yeah.
I mean, I get it. I'm the guy that, you know, used to sleep in the dirty laundry box at the shop. I'm the guy that used to sit in a floor pan and wire cars and sit in a seat and wake up the next morning still in the seat. But, I mean, I get it. But I've had to do that. You know, Junior, he used to get on me all the time. What are you doing wiring that car over here on the picnic table? I said, my knees hurt sitting in the floor pan of that thing. I can wire it just as good here as I can over there. But I'll never forget, we built 14 race cars in 1981. And I got one crammed down my throat. And it was a General Motors thing that Herb Fischel had some yahoo down in Georgia that wanted to build a thing. And I hated that car. God, I hated that thing. And anyway, we finally got it together, and we took it to North Wilkesboro. And that was the biggest piece of junk I've ever seen in my life. And we ran the race, ran third in it, and I called Ralph Seagraves Monday morning. I said, don't you need a show car? He said, yeah, I need one. I said, send somebody up here to get this damn thing. And I'll never forget, Junior, he damn near fired me over that. Because him and Herb Fischel had the big GM thing. They're going to make this car great. That's the biggest piece of junk I ever seen in my life. I sold that damn thing just to get it out of there. And went back to banjos, and we built more race cars. But, you know, we sat on poles, and we won races. And when we go to Wilkesboro or Martinsville or Charlotte or Rockingham, That's a Rockingham car. You don't take no springs out of it. You don't take no shocks off of it. You put that car back over and you leave it alone. That's going back wherever it was. And we had a fleet in 1981. I mean, it was good, and went to New York City and won the championship. I was honored by, being able to walk across that stage and receive the first award. And it was all well and good. And